Hello, welcome to this episode of the FarmED podcast with me, your farmhand and speaker, Alex Dye. I'm not sure I'm a speaker, a podcast host, whatever you want to call me, I'm here. My guest today on this rainy, haily, sunny, windy day is the journalist, educator, author, storyteller, Anna Jones. Quite a broad resume of telling stories about all sorts of different things.
Well, when you put it like that, Alex, yeah, spinning a lot of plates there.
And speaking of choking on my tea, let's go right back to the start then, in terms of all this sort of story. Your story does begin within the world of farming. Mm-hmm. You grew up on a farm, is that right?
Yeah, I did, very
Can
much
you tell us
so.
about that?
So I come from a long line of farmers. In fact, for the book, I did a bit of the family tree stuff. And I went back to the
book plug in nice and early there. That's
the book
professional.
is called Divide. And I went back as far as the mid-1700s. And my mum's side of the family and my dad's side of the family were farming within a 10-mile radius of each other along the English-Welsh border. So I don't come from the deepest gene pool. That's what I discovered. And our family has just been rooted, hefted firmly to this strip of English-Welsh border in Powys on Shropshire, and that's where I am from, and farming beef and sheep. And my mum's side of the family were more sort of farm labourers, tenant farmers on very, very small acreages. My great-great-great-grandfather was a tenant of 6 acres and a farm labourer. And then on my dad's side, I suppose they did marginally better in the sense that they were tenant farmers and then they managed to buy a bit of land. So my grandfather had a 65-acre farm, which now is sort of really embarrassingly small when you say 65 acres now. But, you know, I think he did quite well for his time. And but then, you know, going to the book, that was sold off due to family politics, farming family politics. And my dad pretty much had to start from scratch because he didn't inherit the family farm because it was sold when my great-grandmother died. And so my dad managed to buy, of that 65 acres, he managed to get enough money together to buy 25 acres of it. And that's, or is it 30? 25, 30 acres. That's all we own. And then Dad rents pockets of land here, there and everywhere. And worked really, really hard to raise his 3 girls on effectively 30 acres plus some rented ground here and there, and did it, and that's where we're from. My dad is still farming at 74 years old with dodgy knees.
Wow. But
loving it, and my mum as well, and we go back whenever we can. I think he wants us to wrap wool this weekend, actually. So yeah, that's where I'm from, but I kind of knew very early on that I didn't have the X factor that you need to farm full time. I wish I did, and sometimes I have kidded myself that I do, but if I look deeply inside, I don't think I do. I think I'm lacking that farming gene, but I'm not lacking the love of farming and the passion for our community and the desire to want to contribute to the farming community. But I always knew that my personal passion was stories, people, asking questions, being nosy and talking. And from a very young age, I used to go around our family with a hairbrush as a microphone, and I invented a character called Anna Dooley Dally. And I would go and interview my family about crucial key issues of the day. What are you cooking tonight, Mum? And I was just this kid running around with a hairbrush like a microphone interviewing my family. What are your feelings about the weather today, Dad? And yeah, I was doing that from a very young age. So I think the writing was on the wall that I was going to be a journalist. And I think I made that decision at 12. And then I went 12. And then I went on to university to study journalism, worked in newspapers for a few years, did the kind of coal-face stuff, the chasing ambulances and covering Crown Court and inquests, that kind of hard news stuff, and then started working at the BBC when I was 24.
And that was Farming Today, Countryfile?
Oh no, way back then. So my first ever job at the BBC was an Alan Titchmarsh series called The Nature of Britain, which was a wildlife series. And at the time I was a reporter on the Express and Star, which is big evening newspaper in the Black Country based in Wolverhampton. Had a good job there on their features desk, and just quit it for a 6-week contract at the BBC. So I was like, I'm going to back myself. So I took this 6-week job, and on the final day of that 6-week contract, an internal job was advertised for a researcher on Countryfile. And I had until midnight that night, when my contract would be over and I would no longer be BBC staff. I had until then to get an application in. So I remember on the last day of my contract being in the BBC offices in Birmingham in the mailbox, feverishly writing this application. And then that was in the June or the July, and they weren't having the interviews until the September. So I left the BBC with no job. I went on the dole that summer, actually. Or job seekers allowance. Are we allowed to call it the dole anymore? I did back then. I was on the dole. And then luckily I got that job on Countryfile, and that was the beginning of turning my journalistic career towards farming, towards ag and the environment and all the issues that I talk about now. And I was 25 years old, and I spent 12 years at the BBC as staff on Countryfile, also on Farming Today on Radio 4. I did 2 series of a programme called Country Tracks. And that's...
Do you think if you hadn't come to that with your farming background, do you think that gave you a leg up in terms of getting your foot in the door with that job anyway?
100%. But what they wanted more was the journalism background. I remember that being more highly prized, the newsroom background, because... Countryfile does have a strong journalistic seam running through it. And the TV industry, the people that work in TV aren't always necessarily journalists. They are content producers, they are TV producers, but don't always come from a news background. So I remember the thing that really got me the job, I think, was the fact that I was from a newspaper background and I had that kind of news pedigree. But the farming background, the strength of that came through later. And because no one else was from a farming background. Most people were from urban backgrounds because most people in the UK are from urban backgrounds. So I sort of quickly became the sounding board for all agricultural questions. Anna, what do you think about this? And what would your dad say about this? And, getting asked questions about poultry production. I don't know, we were from beef and sheep farm. But I quickly discovered that I was fascinated with farming and food production and really geeked out on it, and earned a bit of a reputation on Countryfile for being the farming geek. And sometimes I would want to delve deeper because it's television and it's primetime television and it's for a very general audience, and I would have to sort of get reined in a bit because I would want to get into the nitty-gritty. And that's when I requested an attachment to Radio 4 so that I could work on Farming Today and On Your Farm and Radio 4's amazing raft of rural programmes, because that's where I could really geek out.
That was your outlet for those
I
things.
could really get into the nitty-gritty, and suddenly I was surrounded by people that are just as geeky as I am about farming. Charlotte Smith and Anna Hill and Kaz Graham and Heather Simons and this wonderful team of radio producers who are still amazing friends now. I feel very lucky to have had that dual, Radio 4 can go into things a bit deeper. And it's a bit more newsy as well, so it scratched that news itch. But then also having Countryfile to teach me the importance of a light touch with your script, the importance of not keep bringing people in by not going into too much detail, by not using jargon, by being really inclusive in the way that you tell a story, and learning about storytelling techniques that hook big audiences. Because when you're on Radio 4, you're talking more to a niche audience. As much as they say Farming Today is for everyone, it's not pulling the viewers that Countryfile is. So I think that was a really great storytelling training about how to adjust your story depending on how much information that audience is ready for.
And did you find that working on these programmes, were you surprised, or did it change? You sort of touched upon this already. Changed your mind, or you were surprised at how farming was depicted in the media in some ways? Were there some times where you just thought, well, that's just not quite that's not quite right. I mean, you've already sort of said you wanted to go more in depth with some things, but were you a bit concerned at any point about things being, not wanting to misrepresent things in a certain way?
Yeah, I mean,
That's quite a loaded question. I'm not trying to point any fingers at anyone.
No, and
like
I'm glad you asked it, Alex, because the BBC gets a lot of stick. Countryfile gets a lot of stick. People calling it Townyfile, and it rose tints the countryside, and it creates this dumbed down view, this romantic notion of farming. I would push back against that. No, in fact, the BBC values, you hit around the head with them when you're BBC staff. And far from misrepresenting farming, I witnessed throughout my whole BBC career a real desire and determination to get it right. But sometimes the lack of specialism within the team, which is why I became such an important part of that team, I think they were incredibly aware of how complicated agricultural issues are and how complicated agricultural stories are, that I remember long hours, late into the night, we'd be, poring over these scripts. And I'd be saying, oh, you can't really say that. And they were like, yeah, but Anna, if we put that in, it's too complicated. People aren't going to understand what that means. So we'd have to work really, really hard. And I'm talking hours spent on these scripts. How do we distill this really impenetrable, complicated information that only farmers and people working in the industry will understand? How do we wrestle with that and put it across to people in a way that is accessible and is engaging, but crucially accurate? And we never once, compromised on accuracy. Of course you make mistakes because we're human beings, and the BBC is run by human beings. And of course, there were some times that we'd get something wrong, but that was never, ever intentional. And on the very, very few occasions we did, oh my gosh, Alex, I would cry my heart out. I wouldn't get over it for weeks. Making a mistake at the BBC is the worst feeling, because you do uphold those principles of truth and accuracy and fairness and impartiality. I mean, they get drummed into you to the point that you really feel this weight of responsibility as a public service broadcaster. You feel that sense of public service. And if you do get something wrong unwittingly, it's the worst feeling, and everybody shares that. So no, I've never seen sort of deliberate misrepresentation or anything like that.
You were also involved with the Archers for a little while, is that right?
Oh no, yes I was, but you're gonna out me now, because yes I was the agricultural advisor on the Archers. That was
Can I just say I have no idea what I've just stepped in here. I don't know what this is.
Well, I have to be truthful. I completely believe in being truthful. So in 2022 the Archers came to me because the agricultural advisor that had been doing the job brilliantly for ages was sick and was off long term. Somebody from the Farming Today team had stepped in to cover, but that person couldn't be released from the Farming Today schedule any longer, so they needed a freelancer to step in. So the editor called me, and I said, okay, look, I'm gonna have to be completely honest with you. I don't listen to the Archers, and I never have. I actually don't know anything about the Archers. And I know there's going to be intakes of breath around the country now. What? And I said, I really would feel like a fraud. And he said, look, we can teach you the Archers stuff. We just need someone who knows the farming stuff. I said, oh, I can do the farming stuff. I said, I don't necessarily know all the farming answers, but I've got a hell of a contacts book and I know all the people that would. And I think that's the key thing. I'm not saying I'm some kind of guru of agriculture, but I do know where to go to find the answers.
Know the right people.
I do know the right people, and I feel very, very lucky too, through Just Farmers and through my career on Countryfile and Farming Today. So anyway, I started on the Archers, and all of these family lineages and dynasties and their stories and their backstories, and Brian Aldridge did this in the 80s or that in the 90s, and you're just like, oh my gosh, there's so much background I'm never going to catch up on this. And the team on the Archers are just so dedicated and so passionate about those characters and the script writers, and it's just a wonderful team. I did it for 6 months, but it got to the point where I feel like I'm occupying shoes that need to be worn by an Archers fan, because this is the dream job for an Archers fan. And I was job sharing with Sybil Ruscoe, who does the job now, who is an incredible journalist and an Archers fan and absolutely adores the Archers. So I sort of, after they'd got back on their feet and Sybil could sort of step into the breach, I sort of politely doffed my cap and said, I'm going to bow out now. So that's my Archer's truth.
Okay. And you mentioned during that you dropped the Just Farmers hint.
Yes.
Where does that come in your timeline? At what point was that born?
That was born in 2018.
Oh, and also, can you tell us what it is? Sorry, I've jumped the gun there.
So it was the same year that I left the BBC, and they're linked. So you have to go back to around 2015. So bearing in mind, I worked on Countryfile for the first time in 2006. Very, very different times to where we are now, and simpler times in a way. Countryfile was on a Sunday morning then, and in this sleepy morning slot where sort of hungover students loved watching it, and John Craven leaning on a gate, and you'd get 1.8 million viewers, and we were covering rigorous stories, but it wasn't in the public spotlight in the same way it was after 2009, and it went to prime time, and it suddenly went from 1.8 million viewers to sort of 9 million viewers at its peak. At its peak, it was pulling in more viewers than X Factor. The most watched factual programme across British television, all channels, an absolute juggernaut of a programme. And with that kind of profile, inevitably comes a lot of scrutiny and people that want to knock it down. And suddenly you're seeing it covered in the press a lot more. And 2015, so by this point, because again of my news background, I tended to work on the investigations more than the more light-hearted pieces. So Countryfile is a magazine programme, and it's a mixture of light and shade and harder subjects, softer subjects. And I would inevitably be working with Tom Heap on the investigative pieces, and I really loved that. But obviously they tend to be more controversial subjects and rely on getting access to farms when it's a farming story. And this was when we were starting to see the rise of environmental activism, a sort of renaissance of animal rights activism, the whole vegan agenda. Do you remember that time? The media got obsessed with vegans, and there was a lot of coverage at that time. It's kind of gone off the boil now, but farmers were really experiencing challenge and scrutiny at a level they'd never experienced before, and they weren't match fit for it. It sort of came out of the blue, and farmers were like, hang on a minute, we're just getting on with feeding the country, and now we're public enemy number one. Where's this come from? Like, what have we done to deserve this? It really blindsided them. And my job was to cover these issues, because that's the job of the BBC or any media outlet, is to cover the issues that are in the public interest. And at that time, there was a lot of scrutiny on agriculture. Farmers didn't want to talk to us. They were scared of sticking their head above the parapet and inviting unwanted attention from activists. They were worried for their families, for their homes. We were seeing a lot of trespassing and people creeping around farmyards and balaclavas, and it was very tense. And also, there's a level of articulate debate on the other side of these subjects. You know, people like George Monbiot, who is a masterful debater. That is his job. He is a professional communicator, writer, activist, campaigner. And in a debate, he makes mincemeat of his opponents. And I think farmers suddenly felt really scared of joining in these debates, and certainly on national television, on a programme with the profile that Countryfile had. So it was getting harder to get onto farms. It was getting harder to reassure farmers. And they were losing trust in us. They thought that we had this pro-vegan, pro-green, anti-farming agenda. And we were getting called farmer bashers and farmer bashing. And just got really gnarly and really difficult. And obviously all the way through this, I'm a farmer's daughter, and this is my job, but this is also my community and where I'm from. And I suddenly felt this deep personal responsibility to try and do something, because I understand how the media works. We're just trying to do our job. We're just trying to tell stories. We're not bringing bias. We're just trying to tell a story, and we need both sides of that story in order to do that. And if one side is pulling away from us, that's a serious issue for journalistic balance and ultimately democracy. You need everyone to feel that they can have their say. So I applied for a Nuffield Farming Scholarship.
Just to clarify for anyone who is unfamiliar with what that might be, I'm sure in the farming world everyone knows what that is, but what is a Nuffield Farming Scholarship?
A Nuffield Farming Scholarship. I'm going to take a sip of tea. It's a global study programme. So you can go to the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust and you pitch to them an idea for a study that will benefit British agriculture. Could be anything. I mean, the scope is vast. And I went to them and said, I would like to look at the coverage of agriculture in the mainstream media and understand what is creating these barriers to communication that I keep running into. And what can we do about it? So I went down to London, had my interview with the very scary Nuffield board of interviewers. And bearing in mind, I'm a farmer's daughter, but my world is media. My world is, trainers, jeans and hoodies in a production office in some BBC building in a big city. I've not, at that point, moved in agricultural circles, certainly not the leadership circles that Nuffield is. So it was really scary. I was quite intimidated. I had massive imposter syndrome. I bought a tweed coat just to fit in.
Just to look the part.
Yeah, I was like, everyone wears tweed. I better buy some tweed. In fact, one time I went double tweed, had a tweed skirt and a tweed coat. It's so not me, but I was so desperate to try and fit into this world that I perceived I didn't have a place in, even though I'm from that world. I felt like this media type that didn't really know what was going on. Anyway, I got the Nuffield, and they give you a bursary to travel and go and look at your subject. So I spent 2 years, so from 2016 and 2017, travelled to the US, all over Europe, Kenya, South Africa. It was incredible. I went all over the place, to newsrooms, to farms, to the offices of political lobbying organisations, just talking about communication. Discovered a lot of problems on both sides. The media had responsibility. People were losing trust in the media, but also farmers were sort of overly defensive, and there was a real lack of transparency. It was a kind of like wanting to sort of hide things from the public because, they weren't quite sure how to be open about farming practices and things. And
was that more about how they rather than it being whatever they were doing was bad, it was more they were worried about how it would be perceived?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and just this feeling that everyone was against them. Yeah. So it was a difficult relationship. So I came back and thought, I wrote up my report. I presented my findings at the Nuffield Farming Conference in Bristol in 2017, and here are all the problems. Here are why the media and farmers are locking horns and why we're not telling the stories of agriculture as well as we could. And I thought, oh God, that's very depressing. Here's a load of problems. Bye, mic drop. And I thought, no, I need to think about solutions. I need to think about what I can do to try and improve this relationship. So the idea for Just Farmers came to me on a walk around where my mum and dad live. And I suddenly thought, why can't there be like a sort of somewhere that kind of brings farmers together, helps them understand how the media works, tries to strip away some of that fear and some of that suspicion, introduces them to media people that do this job. They can see that we don't have horns and that we're not these evil characters digging through bins and selling our granny for a story. They can see that we're just normal people too, trying to do a job. In stressful circumstances like farmers, we're up against deadlines. And I always say journalists are as obsessed with time as farmers are with weather. So if you can understand the pressures that weather put on you as a farmer, you can understand the pressures the clock put on journalists and why they can be so impatient. So let's try and understand each other better. But then equally, once we've given farmers some training in storytelling and media education so that they can understand how this whole machine works, then there can be like a central place that members of the media can come to when they need an independent case study. Not a politician, not a lobbyist, not an office holder at the NFU or the CLA or the Soil Association or any of these big trade associations, just a farmer or grower, just somebody who can speak from the heart, from, every day working on the land, who can just give their personal testimony and just say, this is how the big issues affect me. And wouldn't that be great? Because we were always looking for a case study. Anyway, Just Farmers was born. It does exactly that. We give farmers media education, these free workshops, fully funded, grant funded for farmers and growers. And then once they've received that training, they get a profile on our website. And then members of the media who we have verified, who we know who they are, who they say they are, they register on the Just Farmers website. And if they're doing a story about bovine TB or agricultural policy or whatever it might be, they can put bovine TB into our search function and it will bring up all the farmers that are happy to talk about bovine TB and a whole other raft of issues. And we've got 156 farmers in the network now and 500 members of the media using the website. International media, national media, local, farm press, general press. It's amazing. It works. And it's a force for good, I hope.
Have there been any really notable success moments where you've seen something come together and you thought, we did that, we've squashed this problem, whatever it might be, this misconception, because we've managed to put these two people in a room together? Anything that you've thought, that we made that happen, that's a brilliant moment?
No, we're more hands-off than that. Because it's never about just farmers. We try and stay in the background as much as possible. We're not a press office. We're not a marketing agency. We don't claim the success for ourselves. All we do is unlock the potential and talent that is within these farmers already. And they go off and do it. And they go off and have the success of achieving those things. We are just creating opportunities for farmers to engage with the media, and we're making it easier for the media to find farmers. What they go off to talk about or film or be interviewed about, that's not my business. We say to the farmers, we're not a dragon at the gate. This is your decision. If you want to pick up the phone to Good Morning Britain or GB News or Countryfile or The One Show or whoever, if you want to pick up the phone and if you want to do it, do it. And we're never going to tell you what to say. We're not going to be there whispering in your ear. It's your opportunity. You make the most of it. And we just I think we just give them that confidence to go and do it themselves. And I'm so proud of them. I mean, gosh, there's been 3 or 4 of them on Clarkson's farm. Richard Heddy is in the Hawkstone Choir. This is not our success. This is just what they go on to do. Charles Godeby in Group 1, who is a well-known ambassador for agriculture and very, very passionate about British farming. He came to me when I was recruiting the first ever group of farmers. He'd never done anything. He said, I'm just that farmer that shouts at the radio and gets really angry about how people are talking about us as farmers. But I never do anything. I never say anything. I never stick up for us. And he said, maybe I should put my money where my mouth is. And I said, well, maybe you should. So we came along and look at him now. He's doing all sorts of stuff. He's all over the place. I mean, I can't even list the things that Charles is doing. There's so many. And there's loads of them. I mean, you have to go onto the Just Farmers website, find a farmer, and you'll see them. Sophie Gregory's on there, Johan Humphreys. That Welsh farmer is Johan Humphreys, who was, after he did his Just Farmers workshop, was instrumental in getting the supermarkets to increase the price of eggs. And, so I would never claim these successes for myself or for Just Farmers. They are the farmers' successes. But I like to think that we've given them that little boost and that they might not have put themselves out there if they hadn't spent 4 days with media people saying, you've got a great story. Tell it, share it, because you've really got something special to say. And I think once we give them that permission, they just fly.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Were there any when it came to these training sessions, when you got everyone together in a room to talk about their stories and how they wanted to sort of display themselves, present themselves? Were there any issues or topics that the farmers were struggling with that you saw come up time and time again? Certain topics they didn't know how to broach or were too afraid to broach, or was it a bit more general than that?
Yeah, the classic one is the what do we call the spiral of doom over we farm animals and then we kill them. We love our animals and then we kill them. And this is something that farmers really wrestle with, because if you're not a farmer and you are somebody that finds the idea of eating animals abhorrent, that is not something that is going to change. That is your view. And I think what we do at Just Farmers is say, that is okay. That is not something that you need to carry or feel angry about, but you do need to respect that people that want to be vegetarian or vegan, that is an absolutely okay choice. It's not something that we need to fight over. We all have agency and control over what we decide to put in our mouths and what we believe. But I was like, they're always like, oh God, but I'm scared of somebody asking me the question about how can you justify killing an animal that wants to live? That I can't give you a script for answering that question. You just have to speak from here and what is true to you. And, I come from a long line of farmers who have raised animals to the best of their ability, loved those animals, and ultimately slaughtered those animals, because that's what livestock production is. And the way that I describe it in my book, the way that me personally, square it and feel comfortable with it and constantly check in with it throughout my life, because this is something that evolves, is we look after animals in life and they look after us in death. And that's the partnership, that's the ancient contract between human and domesticated animal that has evolved over thousands of years through the evolution of farming. And probably because of where I'm from, my genes, what's in me, how I've been raised, I'm personally okay with that. But not everyone is, and that is totally fine. So I think it's about sometimes trying to strip out combative tribalism, anger, division from things, and we do a lot of work around that. We do a lot of work on bridging divides, overcoming. Well, the world that we're in is all about division, and I think Just Farmers is a proudly impartial. We're an impartial project because we want to be totally inclusive. So you'll never hear me say you should farm in this way, or you should follow this system, or that you should have this philosophy or this ideology about farming. Not my place to say. My job is to convene diverse groups of farmers and growers from all sectors, all systems, farms of all shapes and sizes, and to say, you've got a place here because you've all got a story, and we can all be in the room together, even though we farm differently, think differently, believe different things. We can all be in a room together and use storytelling as the uniting force that levels us all. And because we've all got our own story, we're all walking our own path through this life.
But if I were to put you on the spot and give you that spotlight and say, is there or are there any misconceptions that you see come up in the media or about farming generally that you would like to take this chance right now to quash, to say this is true or this is false?
Right. Okay. The two big stereotypes, neither of which is correct. So, in the blue corner, we have the rosy Parlarkin shepherd with his one sheep and one cow and his cute chickens scratching around the yard and the roses around the door, and this romantic notion of the sort of old MacDonald kind of 1950s style farming thing. And that there is a lot of people out there that think that farming is this lovely life and it's so idyllic, and that's one, and that can hold our industry back, because when people see what modern food production is, They go, oh God, that's not what I thought it was like. I don't like that. So the rosy storybook image is a dangerous thing, because if people are carrying that in their heads and then they see the reality, they're going to go through some stuff. So that one. In the red corner, the factory farming, subsidy swilling, badger killing, rich, entitled, horrible, fat landowner who just wants to shoot stuff and rape the countryside and throw his chemicals around, and, also completely caricature. And, and we hear it all the time, how rich farmers are. And it annoys me if farmers act like they are on the poverty line, because let's face it, some are, but most are not. But equally, this idea of privilege and elitism and wealth, and that really gets my goat, really does, because I did grow up in a working class farming community, which was manual labour. Like all the kids I was in school with, their dads, and at that time it was the dads, they are now kind of hunched and broken and arthritic old men who can't stand up straight, who are just, because they have had a life of just hard work on the land for very little money. So when you get this, you're all living in big posh houses and driving Range Rovers, and then I look at my dad and I just see the work etched into every part of his body, that winds me up. So those are that blue corner and red corner, those are the two wrong stereotypes that I rail against.
In terms of miscommunications, your book, Divide, available now in all good bookshops, I'm sure.
I think in the bad ones too.
In the bad ones as well.
Yeah.
Just the bookshops. The bookshops.
All bookshop charity shops.
Bargain bin. You talk a lot about the relationship between town and country. What did that look like as you were looking back and writing this book? And what do you hope it will look like 10 years from now?
Do you know what's really interesting? When I wrote Divide, I was living in Easton in Bristol, BS5 Bristol, which is inner city, very urban, multicultural, quite economically deprived part of Bristol, though rapidly gentrifying. That was a fantastic place to write the book, because I was looking from an urban perspective out. Halfway through writing the book, I moved back to Shropshire because COVID came along and it changed the way that we work. And with flexible working, I was able to sort of go back to my roots, and I now live in Shrewsbury in Shropshire. Suddenly I'm looking from the rural perspective out, and it's really interesting how things have evolved in my mind. I think being a journalist, I'm a trained contrarian, and I will always be seeking the alternative experience, the alternative view. When I was in the city, I saw myself as a champion of rural life and a corrector of mistakes, and somebody that could catch false statements in the moment and go, that's not true. And I used to hear that a lot in the city. And, my local pub stopped serving beef and lamb for the climate, and I was just like, we just need to have a more detailed conversation about this. So, when I was in the city, I really felt like I was trying to be a sort of bastion, sort of speaking the rural voice and the farming experience in a place where it wasn't heard. And now I find myself doing that for the urban. And it's really annoying because I don't fit in anywhere. I sort of feel
sitting on the fence
I'm
everywhere.
always on the fence, and I'm always sort of... So I've gone back to, my rural community, and so now I do hear a lot of things about all those clueless city people. And I've now found myself being the defender of the urban voice, the urban experience. And when I hear things in rural communities that I know to be false, in the same way I heard them in urban communities and knew them to be, I find myself, saying, no, that's not true. You know what I mean? So the answer to your question is, I'm looking at the urban-rural divide from a different side of the fence now. Whereas when I wrote the book, I was in the city. If I was to write it again, it probably might be a little bit different. So they are different worlds, Alex. They are culturally, socially, politically, geographically, economically so different. And we just need to have more conversations, because ultimately they are the same, because we're all human beings, and actually there is common ground with every human being. You just have to put the time into finding it. But I truly believe that, you can find common ground with all of the 9 billion people on this planet if you're willing to step out of your bubble and put yourself into theirs. With urban and rural issues, sometimes there's not a willingness to do that, and that's my constant plea, is step out, think differently, and experience things from the other side of the fence. That's why I'm always saying to farmers, don't just go to the Royal Welsh Show for your holiday, go to London. And equally, to anyone that's never really spent time in the working countryside, go to an agricultural show. Don't just go and sit in some bougie Airbnb in the countryside and think that's living the country life. Get yourself to the Royal Welsh Show.
Yeah, see the real deal.
That's just what I'm always saying. Yeah.
So let's start to wind down, because full disclosure to our listeners, we've both had quite a long day, haven't we? I think I'm fading. I don't know about you.
We're a bit late in the day, aren't we?
We're hanging in there. We've had some funny old weather today. Anyway.
We've got busy days tomorrow as well, because we're off to Cereals.
Off to Cereals. That's dated this episode nicely.
Oh, sorry.
What's next then? What can we expect to see from you in the future? Do you have any other plans of what can we expect to see from you coming soon?
I have got one exciting plan on the back burner that I can't talk about. Unfortunately, so that's just a road to nowhere. Let me take that again. I have got ambitions and things that I would like to do, but at the moment they're just plans. I think what's definitely one to watch is Just Farmers over the coming months. We've got some really exciting plans, and which is an amazing thing for a tiny project that is quite vulnerable in the funding space. We have enough funding to get us through to middle of 2027. After that is who knows. But considering we're not particularly flush, boy, are we ambitious. Emily Davis and I were a small team of 2 part-timers, freelancers that run Just Farmers, and then we draw upon this amazing team of external freelancers that run workshops with us and stuff, plus our network of farmers, our funders, our sponsors, and we've now got a board of directors, which sounds very posh, but we've got this brilliant board of directors: Rob Mercer, Sheena Horner, Andrew Court. Big shout out to those guys. I think you're going to see us doing some really cool stuff because, well, starting with Groundswell. Can I do a shout out for Groundswell? Shout out for Groundswell. We are going to be bringing one of the favourite exercises from our TV workshop, which the farmers always love. We're taking it to Groundswell. Hashtag Can You Clarkson, Can You Craven. Mm-hmm. We're bringing our TV presenter challenge, which is where you get to memorise a piece of script and see if you can deliver it to camera like a TV presenter, and if you've got the X factor that Clarkson has, or John Craven. So we're going to be roaming around Groundswell with our camera, with our boom mic, with our Can You Clarkson sign, and you can come up to us. Doesn't matter if you've had a few pints, you can come up and have a go at being a TV presenter, because that's a little snapshot of what we do at Just Farmers in our media education workshops. We help people have a go at all these different storytelling techniques. So I'm excited about Groundswell.
And where will people, if post-event, if someone's listening to this post-Groundswell, where can they find the output of this?
We're doing it in conjunction with Groundswell. So the Groundswell team are just brilliant. Like, they're totally taking a punt on this. I had this mad idea. Like, can we just go around with a camera and just see if people can be TV presenters? We're going to take all the footage and we're going to cut it into some fun reels, because there'll be some outtakes. There'll be some people that won't be able to do it, but we're doing it. It's lighthearted. It's fun. It's, I think communication sometimes can all get a bit heavy. Like, what's our message? And it doesn't need to be that. Let's have a bit of fun. Let's play. Let's play with the kit, with the cameras, with the microphones, and have some fun with it, because that's where confidence comes from. Just Farmers workshops are not heavy. They're very lighthearted. There's a lot of laughing. there's a lot of learning through play and fun, and we're going to bring a bit of that to Groundswell. And you should see it in the socials afterwards when we cut it all together and people trying to say some tongue twisters. We're going to put a bit of farmer jargon in, so to see if people, because, you know, there's a lot of terms in agriculture that people outside our community won't have the foggiest what it means. So we're going to play around with a piece to camera, takes a bit of farmer jargon, but then we're going to turn it on its head and translate it into normal people language so that everyone can understand it. That's a little bit of a hint of what it'll be like.
Nice. I look forward to seeing that. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come and visit us today, to have a chat about all these weird and wonderful things that are going on in the world of farming. Thank you, Anna Jones. Lovely having you here. And thank you for sticking with us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Do give us a review, a rating, a like, a dislike. If you didn't like it, let us know. We're interested in that as well. But thank you very much for checking out this episode of the FarmED podcast, and we will hopefully see you next time.
Bye-bye.